I saw a video of Levin Brothers Jazz Quartet performing Scarborough Fair, an old folk song that was turned into a pop song or folk rock song by Paul Simon. If I had to define it, I'd say it was jazz. As you go into an improvisation in the middle section, it also seems kind of genreless to me. Is that the way you see it?
No, not really. Although
Uh-huh.
that's a good point. You're not wrong. First of all, we chose to do a Paul Simon song because Pete and I, one of the few bands we toured in together was Paul Simon's band back in the 70s and play that song together. So we thought uh, it'd be nice to revision it and do it as a jazz, but do it as a jazz piece. But to me,
Uh-huh.
it's definitely a jazz band.
Okay.
We do a lot of originals, mostly that Pete wrote, one or two that I wrote. And Pete's jazz arranging, he plays rock also, but he's a jazz player for a long time and particularly talented at arranging things. So we'll do pieces by I got to think now, by Asia. We'll do an Eric Satie, wonderful piece, Gymnopédie, some classical things, but all in a jazz style.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Levin Brothers has been touring and recording for quite a few years, but this is the first year we've toured with a wonderful Ali Ryerson on flute, and she lends it. She's a great flute player, great jazz player, but also has a great stage personality and just kind of lends a sonic personality to the band that we didn't have before. So we're thrilled about this tour and about the new album, which we recorded right before the tour with Jeff and with Ali. And our new album, our new CD, I should say, is very much the material we're playing live.
Great. So you and your brother founded the quartet in 2013. Can you talk about your brother's career in music and how your career and his intersected?
Sure, and good homework on knowing I wouldn't have been able to guess the year that we started it. Pete's been, like I said, playing jazz, notably with the Gil Evans Orchestra and with Jimmy Giuffre, and has probably a dozen solo albums of his own, jazz albums, while I've been doing a parallel career playing rock and playing with Peter Gabriel and Pink Floyd and mostly with Peter Gabriel and with King Crimson. And through those years, occasionally we played together, but some time ago, we thought, gee, it's about time we formed a band. And interestingly, we decided for that first album to do very much the music that we listened to when we were kids together, growing up in Boston, which was, if you can believe it, back in the 1950s. And it was a style of jazz called cool jazz, which had players playing very short solos and short pieces. Amazingly, that is so different than now, that the jazz piece, the track might be 2 minutes, 3 minutes long, 4 minutes at the longest, and four guys solo on it just for 30 seconds each. So I was very fond of that style, and it's what got me into music. And personally, I became a big fan of Oscar Pettiford, the bass player I heard doing that. So it was a treat back in 2013 to do an album of that style, not that music, because we easily rewrote new music in that style. But after touring a couple tours with that music, we decided to stretch out more and do more of the things that we can do as a jazz group. Sorry about the phone ringing in the background.
No
I
worries.
didn't mute it. My bad. And also, like I said, Pete's such a great arranger and does things in different jazz styles. So we decided to feature that.
Thank you for that. Now, maybe the first time I heard your bass line, I'm pretty sure it had to be, or yeah, it had to be Shock the Monkey, Peter Gabriel,
Yeah.
Shock the Monkey. And at that time, that sounded like nothing else I'd ever heard on the radio. And I didn't know, I remember I didn't know what to think of that at first, but after a while, I thought, wow, this is just an amazing song. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the evolution of that song and your contribution to it?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, credit goes to Peter Gabriel
Mm-hmm.
for being the creative, think outside the box person and artist that he is. So when you play with Peter Gabriel, and I have for a very long time, you don't just play your average bass parts because it's not called for. Everything about his music is progressive and unusual and comes up with new ideas. So the perfect instrument for me to play on that piece was the Chapman stick, this 10 or 12 string beast that I play that has six. The one I play now is 12 strings, has 6 bass strings and 6 guitar strings, and it's tuned differently. It's tuned backwards from a bass, and it's in fifth, and it features big jumps, but also it's a very percussive sound because it's a touch style guitar or hammer on. And so when I hear, I could talk about that piece, but any piece of Peter's, when I hear it, I listen to what he's done, and I kind of imagine what kind of bass part could I try to come up with that really suits the creative freshness of that piece. And it's usually not something I've done before. So I might have to experiment a lot with sounds or with an instrument I haven't played much, or with things like dampeners under the strings, or try different recording techniques that I haven't done. So Peter is the perfect chance to do that. It's like an R&D opportunity for my bass playing. And Shock the Monkey is a perfect example. It didn't take me long. It could have taken long, and he would have allowed me that, but it didn't take me long for me to find a kind of groove on the Chapman stick that was different than the norm, and it seemed to suit that piece really well.
Did
The
it?
hard part, let me add, the hard part, when we play it live, was whenever he sings the word shock, we would jump, we would sing shock and jump. And for me to jump and sing and play the Chapman stick, which by the way hooks into your belt, and you're meant to stand still, so when you jump, it flies out of the belt, and you need to hold it down with one hand. But anyway, that was more of a challenge than recording the album version, which was came along pretty easily for us in the studio.
Did it seem like you were on the verge of something really new when you were working on that album with Peter Gabriel?
I don't really think that, to be honest, we don't think that way in the studio. You just kind of do it. I could say the same thing for years before that, when I played the first album I played with King Crimson, the Discipline album, which I did a lot of it on the stick, and pieces like Elephant Talk that became kind of a little bit of a signature for that incarnation of that band. You don't sit around thinking, oh, we're doing this and this is going to happen. Really, you don't know even what's going to happen to the record release. It could be very popular, or it could be that nobody listens to it. Most musicians in that situation, in my recollection, most musicians just focus on the music, making it as good as it can, and making it as fresh and progressive as we can, if that's what that album is aimed at, which is certainly the case with Peter.
Mm-hmm. And when I think of your bass in those songs, I think, forgive me, I'm not a musician, so I think of it having a groove and a voice.
Yeah,
in something like Red Rain, for example. I mean, I can hear those bass lines. I don't as far as like guitar, I can't recall guitar parts on or Shock the Monkey, but I recall the bass.
Yeah, well, that's nice. Thank you. That's not my aim. I think sometimes, in my opinion, or the way I look at it from the inside, from my part, is sometimes the song will allow that. The song has a cool thing for it. And of course, I want to play something rhythmically that is very cool and works with the drummer and suits the song. But sometimes there's room to step out a little bit on the bass and to do something melodic. Certainly that's the case in a lot of the Paul Simon. We mentioned Paul Simon before. 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover in the beginning. There was a chance for me to play some bass chords up high, which I wouldn't do if he was singing busy, but there was just kind of room for that. And sometimes in my sensibility, there isn't room for that. And even though I might have a cool lick that would fit with the chords and the drums and the guitar, the vocal is busy at that point. And so for me, it's musically wrong to intrude on that with my bass part, and something that I hope I'm musical enough to never do.
In preparing for this, I listened to a performance. I think it was a Les Paul tribute, and you were playing with Eddie Van Halen. And maybe that's an example where you want to play a more supporting role. I'm just guessing.
First of all, that was great fun, and he was a great guy, and he mostly played with his band. He didn't jam around with other players much, so he was kind of excited about doing it. And he had written, unlike everyone else on the bill, he had written the piece for it, I think. That's my memory, and it was just really fun. And yes, you're exactly right. I didn't need to step out too much on the bass. There was plenty being done by the guitarist.
And yet it looked like you all were having a really good time on that one.
A very good time for
Yeah.
sure.
Um, and it seems like you're okay with those who see that like supportive role of the bass as their role more than stepping out. Like I remember that seemed to be the philosophy of Gary Talent, Bruce Springsteen's bassist. It's like keep the song going. Um,
Yes, for me, I don't have one rule or one way it's got to be. I
mhm,
certainly can be. I actually, frankly, I play a lot of very simple music, folk music, and people's ballads that don't require much. And I play a
mhm,
lot of very complex progressive rock things and jazz things, which call for the bass doing plenty sometimes. So I don't have rules about that. Like many bass players, I'm a fan of a lot of bass players I've heard on records. Sometimes I don't know their name. Sometimes I do know their name and I hear everything they do. And some of the players, I mentioned Oscar Pettiford back from when I was a kid. He didn't. He played very simply, and his solos were wonderfully melodic. But then later there was Jaco Pastorius, who reinvented what you can do on the bass, and
mhm,
I admired them equally, and I learned from them equally. And sometimes I'll even hear, on some record, on the radio, I'll hear something where I don't like what the bass player did very much, and I will learn from that. I will learn well,
mhm,
and I'll think that somewhere, maybe not consciously, but in the back of my mind, I'll feel like, well, if I'm in that situation, I'll be sure not to do that because somehow it didn't seem to work when I heard it on the radio. So I don't have that many rules about how to play bass, but I try to work on my craft, and I hope that I can, if nothing else, be musical with all my efforts.
mhm. And is there still room for good bass playing with some of the more, shall we say, synthetic stuff you hear on the radio these days? Or
Well, yeah, I don't listen to the radio much, but on YouTube, my God, there's amazing things. There's like a revolution of young bass players,
mhm,
men and women, thank goodness, who are fantastically adroit and have technique way beyond anything I ever even dreamed of. So I watch
mhm,
that a lot, not all the time, not obsessively, but again, I try to learn from it, even if it's a I'm laughing as I say this, but even if it's a 14-year-old playing with technique that I could never match in my whole life, even if I start practicing it now.
that's
So
pretty amazing.
I'm
Like,
smiling as I say that, but there's still things
yeah,
to learn from it, from the
mhm,
technique, if I can see the way they hold their hand and things like that. And I think it's a fun thing about the bass and about music in general. You can play it very simply and you can be happy with what you play, or you can spend your whole life practicing and trying to learn to do it better. And each of those approaches is valid. For me, it's the second one. I keep trying to do my job a little better and to learn musically from what I hear.
what are funk fingers?
Well, I don't have them along on this tour because it's a jazz tour. By the way, on this tour, I'm playing mostly the upright bass, the NS electric upright,
Okay.
which is suitable for jazz. But I brought an old Gibson bass guitar of mine that's fun and has an unusual sound. So the back recording with Peter Gabriel on the So album, we did one piece. We recorded one piece called Big Time, where I asked the drummer Jerry Marotta to drum on the bass strings while I fingered the left hand. That's not an idea I invented, but it just kind of popped itself into my head, and it seemed appropriate for that piece. So that's
Mhm,
the way we recorded Big Time. And then live, I found I had a problem because I can't play with two drumsticks on the bass at the same time as I'm fingering the bass. And one day at sound check on the tour, which would be, I guess, 1986, Peter walked by me, Peter Gabriel, on stage as I was practicing with one drumstick trying to play that part. And he said to me just very simply, he said, well, why don't you put two drumsticks on your fingers, chop them off and put them on your fingers? And I did exactly that. It took quite a while, and there was a different experimentation with stretched Velcro to hold it on. And if it was too tight, my fingers would turn purple. And if it was too loose, the funk finger, what I later named funk finger, would go flying into the audience. So I had good fun with it. And eventually, after that tour, I got kind of better technically at using them. And I played them on other pieces with King Crimson and in other contexts. Never a whole lot. I remember touring with Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe, the band that's generally known as Yes, and trying to cop Chris Squire, the wonderful bass player Chris Squire's amazing pick parts, bass parts that were played with a pick. And I'm not that good with the pick, so I decided to do that whole tour with the funk fingers, and had to practice a lot, and it was fun. To me, they're a percussive way to play the bass, and in some situations they're just right, and in others, maybe I would reach for something different. That's
Great.
probably more than you ever wanted to know about funk fingers.
Well, no, I think people will be really interested in that.
Okay,
Thank you
good.
for the great
Good.
description. You've worked with some of the great rock and pop performers, such as Lou Reed, Paul Simon, David Bowie, Robert Fripp. Very different performers, but who want different things from you, I assume, right? And it seems like you're perfectly okay with whatever they want.
Well, I've done a lot of recording sessions,
Mhm,
through the years. They're each different. There's the
mhm,
producer who has his ideas, and usually it's the producer who chose the musicians who come in. Not always, but usually. But sometimes it's the artist who chose. Sometimes, in the case of both David Bowie and John Lennon, whose album I did, Double Fantasy, neither of them knew who I was when the producer called me to come in, and it
mhm.
was kind of how shall I describe it? The feeling of meeting either of those guys when they're I could see on their face, and I could feel that they're a little bit doubtful of. It's kind of like they say, "This guy's good. I hope he doesn't just overplay and ruin my music." I could sense that they felt that way, and I wasn't worried because I knew I wouldn't do that. But actually,
Uh-huh.
with John Lennon's first words to me when he met me in the Pit Factory in New York City, were, "They tell me you're good, just don't play too many notes." And I said, "Don't worry, I won't." And I had a ball on that record. But anyway, each one, to go back to how I started this, each session has its own path and its own way it'll come together. Some of them only take a day. Some sessions take a month on a few songs. So they really vary a lot. So, and again, there's no rules. In my experience, I enjoy just coming up with the bass part, but I also enjoy kind of doing it in a group way where the artist, especially the songwriter, has something to say about what he or she had in mind when they wrote the song for the bass part. And hopefully we come up with the best of both worlds, with their idea coming to fruition, but also with my sense of being a bass player, and also my sense of the sound on the bass. I've talked a little bit about the approach and hearing the instrument and the notes, but the sound of the bass has a lot to do with how I conceive of what will go with the song. And there's a lot of little subtle ways that a bass player can change his sound by where he puts his finger, or by which instrument he chooses, and sometimes by literally putting foam rubber under the strings, or hitting it with a stick, as in the case of funk fingers.
It seems like, from my point of view, is that some of the world music that you've done, that must be really fascinating to get together with people like Shankar. Um, and I remember the first piece I heard by that double violinist Shankar on Peter Gabriel's uh, Passion Sources. It's not his music, but inspirational music for the Passion album. Um, and I was just blown away by this guy. That piece on Passion Sources, I never get tired of it.
Yeah,
It's such
yeah.
a beautiful piece. I'm wondering what it was like recording with him, and your thoughts on playing bass in this genre of world music in general.
Yes, it's been a mind expanding experience, and a musically expanding. After a whole bunch of years, decades playing music, you tend to start feeling like you kind of know what's going on, and then suddenly, if you're playing with, let's say, African musicians or Indian musicians, uh, or some of the many others that Peter would interact with and bring into the band and bring into our sphere of making music, you play with them, or you start to play with them, and you realize you only know some of what's going on, and there's a lot to learn and a lot of co-mingling to be done. So in the case of Shankar is a good friend of mine, and I played on some of his albums in addition to Peter's. It was a great learning experience and just great fun making music with him and being on tour with him. But there have also been the Youssou N'Dour and the African bands that opened for Peter's show and then played along with Peter in the show. And goodness, probably too many world musicians that I've met through Peter and then had relationships with afterwards, musical relationships with. I'm just terrifically lucky to have had that experience. And that's part of what makes Peter Gabriel such a special artist. It's not just his music, but his inclusive sense of being an artist is extraordinary. And so how lucky am I that I just kind of got to be there on the stage or in the background and got to meet and experience the music of all these wondrous players.
Out of curiosity, I didn't think of this when doing my research for this, but was Bob Amal one of those that you played with?
Yes, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing voice,
Yeah.
beautiful voice.
Yeah.
So you have this quote that I got from, it's the South Bank show, and it was basically showing Peter Gabriel's process putting together the Security album in the early 80s. And you were interviewed in it, and you said, once you get a groove going, you want to keep doing it because I'm a bass player. I spend my whole life looking for a groove. Is that still your is that still your philosophy?
I think it almost is. Yeah, let me think about it a minute. I know I'm often embarrassed to hear what I said in previous interviews, especially one in the last century, not only decades ago, but in the last century. But that's not bad. I'm not embarrassed by it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Yes, I think maybe it's not at the top of my consciousness much of the time, but I am looking for grooves. And when the chance to have a good groove pops up, it kind of overrides everything else. That's for sure.
Great. And out of curiosity, what albums did you play with David Bowie on?
That's a good question. I played only one piece on the album that I think was called Heathen, maybe.
Okay.
But then his second to last one, the one with Where Are We Now? And he's like this. You can see me.
Oh,
Like
gosh.
this on the cover. I can't remember the title.
I can picture the album. I just can't picture the title.
We can look it up. But
yeah, I could look it up later. Second to
for
last
sure.
album.
Where Are We Now was the first single released from it. That album was done in secret. I could talk all day about that album. I'm not his bass player. His bass player, Galen Dorsey, by the way, a fantastic bassist, was busy doing something else for 1 week of the recording process. And they brought me in for that week. And I never thought that I would be on too many of the tracks because the album was ongoing for a year. But I ended up on quite a few of them, and I'm very happy about that. And it was secret sessions because David had been not making records for quite a while, and the production wanted to be sure that I didn't tell anybody that I was doing these sessions, which I didn't. And a whole year went by after that, and frankly, I forgot about it. I forgot I'd even done it. When one night, the producer emailed me right at midnight, and he said, "This piece is, and with its consequent video, is coming out right now, right this minute." And it was a great feeling to watch that very special song and to realize I'm on it, playing bass on it. It was really an honor. So that was quite an experience for me playing with David.
You described in one of the interviews I saw with you, you describe a lot of your musical career as happenstance, like you meet the right people at the right time.
Yeah.
And that leads to something like in the case of King Crimson and Peter Gabriel, that's led to very long-term collaborations.
Yeah. Sorry, I was typing, I was Googling David Bowie albums. Yes, just I agree with what I seem to have said. Sometimes just luck, like almost any other field. Sometimes bad luck is you're not available for the thing that would have been great, and sometimes good luck is you are available when someone else wasn't available. And that happens probably in music more than in anything else. And in my career, there have been lucky breaks, and there have been unlucky breaks where I didn't get to do something I would have loved to do because I was already booked for something else.
Can you talk a little bit about your set list on the 17th, or have you discussed that with your brother and
Yeah, no, I know the set list, but
some highlights?
give me a second because
Yeah,
we're
sure.
not live. If I could find it, it would be better than trusting my memory. So where is it? I'm not going away.
No worries.
It's right here within reach, and that's unusual because the reason is this is a hotel where we don't trust the parking lot. So we brought all our gear,
Or
including my set list, my bag with pedals and set list. We brought it all
where
into
are you now,
into
by
the
the way?
hotel. I'm in Milwaukee.
Milwaukee. Okay, Central
Yeah.
Time. Yeah.
Yeah. Although the show's not until tomorrow. Okay. We will do a piece of Pete's we'll start with, and then we'll do our version of Eleanor Rigby, which we call Eleanor Funkby because it's a little bit funky. We'll do a Jimi Hendrix piece, then we'll do Eric Satie's Gymnopédie, wonderful on the flute. We'll do our version of Steely Dan's Asia. We'll do a Lenny White piece. We'll do a song I wrote, titled Ostropolia, the town in Ukraine that our mother was born in.
No kidding.
We'll do
Okay.
Scarborough Fair, as you had mentioned. Oh, I see another Hendrix. Quite a bit of material of really different. It's not and quite a bit of Pete's pieces that he composed. A
Sounds
wide
great.
variety, and what I think is an audience pleasing kind of jazz, where it's not extremely loud, and it's my feeling is that you get the sense of the personality of the musicians. We're not just up there being remote from the audience and
Playing with your back to the audience and such.
Yeah, playing for let me put it a bit better, playing only for ourselves. We don't do that. We're very aware of how the audience feels about what we do. And like I said, it's a thrill to come back to the theater and to be back in Indianapolis. And I think the audience will enjoy the show a lot.
Well, great. I think we have ourselves a really good interview here. Thank you so much.
I
Is there
appreciate the
anything you want
homework
to
you
add?
did. No, I want to say I appreciate the homework you did and your expertise and the quality of your questions. It makes it way easier for me.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thanks.
No
Haircut's
expert
not
in
bad
anything,
either.
and my only instrument is the harmonica, but
Well, that's an instrument.
it's an instrument.
Yeah.
I enjoy playing it.
Well, very, very nice speaking to you. Thanks very much. Can't thank you enough. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tony Levin. I really appreciate your talking to me today. Take care and have a good show.
Take care. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We'll speak again.